The year is 1705. Charles XII has fought through Poland-Lithuania like a hurricane, forcing the Saxon armies to abandon it, and has instated a new king to the throne of Poland in Stanislav Leszczynski. With the Saxon armies forced to Dresden, and the Russian successes amounting to the capture of a few fortresses in Neuen and Ingermanland, a new conjoint plan is formed between the forces of Augustus II, Peter I, and Polish nobles of the Sandomier's Confederation. A large Russian army would move from Polotsk to Warsaw, forcing Charles XII's armies to defend it and granting Saxon armies passage into Poland. A combined Saxon, Polish and Zaporizhian Cossack army would then come from the south, and the three-pronged attack with numerical superiority of over 3-1 would force the Swedish king to capitulate. While General Ogilvy's army was moving to the fortress of Grodno, General Shermetev became worried about the possibility of this main force being cut off from retreat by the Swedish army in Kurland under General Lewenhaupt. Shermetev was given permission to drive off this army and occupy Kurland to guarantee a retreat option for the Russian army. The two armies met somewhat unexpectedly near the town of Gemauerthof, and following a few cavalry skirmishes by scouting parties, the two generals lined their armies for battle. The Swedish army had arrayed into a defensive position to minimize the effects of the Russian numerical superiority. Their left flank anchored to the Swedish river, and their right by marshlands. The Russian army had spread across a wide frontage, but movement would be made difficult by the river, marshes and forests littering the field. To have any effect on the battle, Bauer's Dragoon Brigade would have to ford the river, though it could present an opportunity to strike the Swedish at their flank. Shermetev ordered his generals to advance. While most brigades had relatively little trouble in their movements, Ignatiev's Dragoon Brigade was being split up by difficult to maneuver forest roads. Lewenhaupt saw this as an opportunity. The Russian army could be split in twain before they had time to redress their battle line. The Swedish cannon attempted to harry the dragoon regiments emerging from the forest, but their fire had little effect. Despite the Russian main body getting closer, Lewenhaupt remained on the offensive. A successful attack against the two dragoon brigades on the Russian right would wholly eliminate any numerical edge the Russians might have otherwise enjoyed. This overly aggressive approach would later prove to be the death of many a Swedish cavalryman. The attempted spoiling attack across the river failed, as fording the river became a slog, but the charge against Ignatiev's brigade worked and drove many of the dragoons back into the forest they had just crossed. The main Russian body had however now caught up to the dragoons and began wheeling towards the isolated Swedish cavalry. Across the river, Bauer's dragoons also had troubles fording. The two cavalry forces were now content with discharging their pistols and carbines at each other ineffectually. The musket fire from the Russian infantry brigade was however very effective. The heavy fire meant that Lewenhaupt now had to order a general advance against the main Russian line to protect his cavalry, even pulling an infantry brigade to cover his left flank against an eventual attack from the river. The Russian guns had however slowly crawled to positions, and their close-range fire proved devastating. As Swedish cavalry was forced to retreat from the remains of Ignatiev's Dragoon Brigade, the infantry that was meant to protect the Swedish flank panicked, thinking they were being attacked from three sides, and routed from the field. In the tumult of battle, Lewenhaupt suddenly lost half of his infantry force before it had even had time to fire. With the Russians now threatening encirclement, Lewenhaupt had to pull his remaining reserves to the left wing. but this now left the Swedish right wing to a massive numerical disadvantage. On the other side of the river, the Russian guns continued to devastate Swedish lines, driving them south along the river. The Swedish infantry was beginning to buckle under the weight of enemy fire, and the dragoons threatening their flank. A moment's respite came from the reserves, forcing Bauer's brigade back across the river, and from a successful Swedish door-pour charge managing to rout some of the unprepared Russian infantry. The remains of Ignatiev's dragoons were also forced into the forest, giving the Swedes some breathing room on the left flank. But this was not to last. As Russian reserves were now piling on, the Swedish right wing collapsed, leaving Lewenhaupt with only a small cavalry force to try and salvage the situation with. Looking at his position, Lewenhaupt could quickly gather that the battle was undoubtedly lost. However, there was still something to be done to save the army. The main Russian force was now tired, disorganized, and far away from Bauer's brigade. If he could take his remaining cavalry, ford the river himself, and drive away the remains of Bauer's force, he could now defend the crossing and the path to the Swedish camp on the other side of Gemauerthof, as well as organize a fighting retreat towards the friendly territory if the Russians would attempt to follow them. Quickly collecting his remaining cavalry units, Lewenhaupt ordered his cavalry to advance across the river as quickly as possible. Shermetev, realizing his plan, began wheeling his troops to help Bauer, but the disorganized units had little success in their maneuvers. A series of costly Swedish attacks managed to eventually break Bauer's isolated brigade, driving them north and towards the forests, where the remains of Ignatiev's brigade were swept away with the fleeing dragoons. With Lewenhaupt now entrenched across the river, Shermetev had no choice but to call off the attack. His force was spent. Had he managed to beat the Swedish cavalry and cross, he wouldn't be able to persecute the fleeing enemy towards Riga. Lewenhaupt's aggressive tactics had nearly cost him the entire battle, but in its aftermath both sides would be able to now claim victory. The Russian army had been victorious in the field, but as they had abandoned it in the end, the Swedes could now claim its mastery. Regardless of the victor, calling it Pyrrhic would be an understatement. Lewenhaupt's army, now in tatters, would have to retreat to Riga, hoping that his efforts would grant even slight leeway to the armies of Charles XII. Shermetev's force would require heavy reinforcement to be able to occupy Kurland, siphoning away important reinforcements from the Grodno campaign. Despite the tactical outcomes of the battle being vastly different from its historical antecedents, the strategic outcome remains the same. The Grodno campaign goes ahead as planned, but with crucial Russian reinforcements having to be sent to Kurland instead of Poland. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you'd like to know more about the wargaming rules used, Twilight of the Sun King, I'm planning on releasing a short video series detailing the mechanics of the rule set in the fighting of this particular battle. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.